Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Bobby Piton here. And like I mentioned in my header, I'm going to just talk about currencies today. So just say some quick hellos. Deanna, Jason, Kathleen, Jules, good to see you all. And I guess let's get started. So there's been a lot of concern and talk that the U.S. dollar is going to collapse. I've heard about this my entire life. Actually, I've heard, like, not just professionally, folks. I've literally heard about this my entire life. And let me go back to the early 80s, okay? So when the Cold War was going on and it was the U.S. against Russia, my parents immigrated from Poland. And my dad told me firsthand as to what all the disinformation that was taking place during World War II, that the dollar was going to collapse and that it was going to be worthless and you should sell all your dollars, and that that it's going to be, America's going to go completely belly up and broke and so forth. And he heard that throughout his whole life before he immigrated to the United States in the mid 70s. And then we kind of heard it in the 80s. And now we're hearing it in the 2020s. And I think it's a bunch of nonsense. The U.S. dollar is the most widely used currency in the world. And so what I would like to do is kind of explain, and we're going to kind of do a trip down memory lane. I'm going to show you some charts of currencies through time of different major currencies that you probably have heard of, okay? One being the Japanese yen. Another might be, we're going to look at I think the British pound, and we're going to look at a couple other currencies, like even the Mexican peso, right down south of the border, and maybe we'll look at the Canadian dollar as well. I did find an interesting website that you guys can also check out. And so what I'm going to do, let me just pull this up. Just want to make sure that what we pull up, that you can see it rather quickly. Hold on. And then we're going to, we'll go through some of the charts. Then we'll go through what goes into pricing a currency. And then from there, I'll open it up to some questions if people have questions. Okay? But, and I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. So I'm going to just do pretty fast. I'm going to say, look at what the currency was. Look at how much it went up. Look at how much it was. Look at how much it went down. And so that I want you to picture these forces as to what's causing a currency to go up or down. Think about it as you see it, about that particular country, what you've read about, what you've heard about in the news over time. And then we're going to kind of go underneath the hood and look at, well, what caused it, right? Because that's more important. What's causing these currencies to go up and to go down over time, okay? So with that being said, we're going to start with the good old-fashioned British pound. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So here we go. So this website is called macrotrends.net. So I'm going to just type it in. If anybody wants to check it out, you can pull up other currencies. Now keep in mind, some of the currencies that have been discontinued, unfortunately, they're not easy to find. So like the Deutschmark, the Italian lira, those are the currencies that were in Europe before the euro came into existence. A lot of people don't realize that. Believe it or not, I remember I actually interned in the Deutschmark pit in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange when I was in college. So long time ago, folks, they used to trade the Deutschmark, if you could believe it. And so, things have changed in this world quite a bit since then. But let's look at the pound. And so, the pound, you can see right here back, this is 1971. This is before we went off the gold standard. It was $2 and 2.42 pounds. Okay, is what it was. Now this is to the U.S. dollar. So what does that mean? When something is 2.42 to the U.S. dollar, that means you had to pay up $2.42 for each pound. That's what you had to pay before. Okay, so if you had a dollar and if you only wanted to buy one, so let me just tell you right now. If I'm going to use Excel now, so we're going to punch this in because this can be a little tricky. Currencies are an interesting thing to wrap your mind around because you have to do some math, and sometimes it's reversed for one currency and it's the opposite for another. So in the case of the pound, we're going to say it was 242 back in 1971. So that means if the U.S. dollar is this, the pound, it's the dollar sign, right? We're all used to that. We're going to do 1, and then we're going to do 242. And this is going to be GBP, I think is the British pound. So this ratio, when you take 1 and you divide it by that means that, if you were buying, the U.S. dollar was worth about 41% of what 1 British pound was worth. Okay, because this conversion was you had to come up with $2.42 to get 1 pound. So ironically, it's like the way the British did it. The higher the number, the more it costs you in U.S. dollars. Now, each government has a different set of rules or different convention, I guess you can say. So, if you were to convert 1 U.S. dollar and you wanted to say, hey, Britain, how much will you give me for 1 U.S. dollar back in 1971? They'd say, Bobby, we'll give you 41 cents. That's it. And that's all you can get. And so, or not 41 cents, 41 pence, actually, because it's pounds and pence. So Britain operates with a pound and pence system. We operate with dollars and pennies. So they have pounds and pence. We have dollars and pennies. So they would give us 41. I think it's the conversion for pence is I think I'm not sure if there's 100 pence to a pound. I'm assuming it is, but I haven't looked at it in a while. But anyways, so this is what's going on with the pound. So now we're going to look at the Mexican peso. We all know about the Mexican peso, right? It's right there south of the border. And I want to look at this one because we're going to look at how Mexico has progressively gotten poorer every year. And it's a horrible thing. And I've said this before. The best way for the United States, a really important thing for the United States to have in place for Mexico long term is we need to have a healthy Mexico, a strong, vibrant Mexico, because we have foreign countries, China in particular, that possibly could use Mexico as a proxy to invade the United States. And so we're doing a lot of foolish things, and we have been for over 20 years. And you can see right here in the year 2000 what the peso was at. But we're going to go back to 1995. This is when Slick Willie got into office. You guys remember Slick Willie, Bill Clinton? Okay, so 1994. The peso was 3.37 to 1. So that means, we're going to put the peso in here, 3.37 to 1. That means if you took $1, now keep in mind this is the opposite of Britain. So if you gave the Mexicans $1 US, they would give you 3.37 pesos. So that means that 1 peso, okay, 1 peso. If you wanted 1 peso, it cost you 29.67 cents. So I want you to think about that. You're like, okay, Bobby, if you give someone in Mexico back in 1994, if you gave them 29 cents, they would give you 1 peso. Okay, that's what that number is saying. So it's the opposite of the British pound, and I'm doing this on purpose because you can't ever make the assumption that the way that you think it should be is the way you should compute what a currency is worth. You need to find out how each currency is. What their convention is and what is the order. And if you don't do that, you can get pretty badly hurt. You'll make some bad decisions. So now let's go to today. Okay? Now the peso, believe it or not, right here, last year in May, the peso fell to 23 point, what have we got here? 23.96? 24.987. So 24.987 is where the peso fell. Okay? Now keep in mind, folks, using the same equation, we're basically saying, okay, Bobby, $1, if we convert it, it costs us 29 cents to equals 1 peso. Okay? Hold on, I gotta just do this. Okay, so if we want 1 peso, we have to pay somebody in Mexico 29 cents. Now keep in mind, this is back in 1994. Okay, year 1994. Now if we go to 2020, the peso cratered with the whole COVID thing, if you guys recall. And so it fell to 25 to 1. So 4 cents, folks. So if you wanted 1 peso, you had to give somebody in Mexico 4 pennies. You give them 4 pennies, and they give you 1 peso. So you think about it, and you're like, wow, if I can go to Mexico and buy lunch there every day instead of in the United States, how much cheaper would it cost me to buy food to eat in Mexico versus the United States? Well, you can see that if you're in Mexico, you're like, man, Bobby, the past 26 years, okay, because the year 2020 minus 1994, okay, 26 years, right? I guess you can take 1 year off if it's the end of 94. But 26 years, how much did the peso decline? Well, if you were getting 29 cents on your money in 1994, but now you can only get 4 U.S. cents for every 1 peso you give somebody, you lost 86% of your money. Okay? So the average Mexican who had money in the Mexican peso got absolutely annihilated. It's a horrible thing, folks. This is not a good thing. This is a horrific thing. Now, keep in mind, the peso has rallied recently, and right now it's at about about 20. So right now, it's about 20 in 2021. So the peso is back up to 5 cents. But even with that, 5 cents, okay, the peso's lost 83% of its value. Okay, so you lost 83% of your money if you were in the peso. Now, when you know this fact, is it crazy that a bunch of people from Mexico want to come into the United States? How could you not? Let's just be rational here for a second. I'm first of all, folks, just make it clear, I'm against illegal immigration. I'm okay with legal immigration with skill sets that the United States needs. I do think it should be a merit-based system. But I'm just trying to explain to you why there's people literally trying to break into this country. They're trying to get into the entire country. No, keep in mind, PW, they lost a factor in inflation, actual good costs. Now, that does purchasing power parity is adjusting for that. Now, when I say it lost 83%, I want to make something very clear here. It lost 83% of its value relative to the United States dollar. So if you were a wealthy Mexican back in 1994 and you had 1 million pesos and you wanted to go buy, a house in the United States, you could buy a house for 300 grand. You hand over 1 million pesos. It was 29. You could buy one for $296,700. That's what it would cost you. You could have handed somebody in the United States 1 million pesos. They give you a house for $296,700. Now that same $1 million today, if you had 1 million pesos today, that money was sitting in your vault. You had a vault in Mexico. You didn't trust the banks. You're like, I'm going to keep my pesos in a vault in my house. And there was 1 million pesos. and you said you fell asleep, right? Your family just cracked open the safe. They're like, look at this. Grandpa had 1,000,000 pesos. Okay. And what's it worth? And then you went to turn it in, and it was worth 50 G's, right? That's the deal, folks. So it went from being worth 296,000 in 1994 to being worth $50,000 today. Okay? Now you ask yourself a question. Wow, your money earned you nothing. You should have earned some interest on it. You should have maybe put the money to work somewhere, but no, you didn't. You just sat with it, and the cash literally decayed right in your safe. And so if you wanted to buy a house in the United States that was $296,000, you would have to come up with close to 6 million pesos, right? That's the deal. You would have had to go from, 1,000,000 pesos in 1994 to 6 million pesos today. And that's the reality. So you ask yourself a question: why is this happening? We the United States, supposedly, right? I say supposedly because I think we should audit all these numbers. We've sent Mexico supposedly $1 trillion, 1 million millions of money we've sent to Mexico, and by the way of trade surpluses. Mexico has run a trade surplus with the United States, believe it or not, which is counterintuitive. Because if we have more money going into Mexico, right, the United States has more money going into the country of Mexico than we receive back from Mexico. In general, that should be pressure up. That should be, the peso should get stronger. This is the old thing called supply and demand, folks. If we as Americans want to buy goods produced in Mexico, we send them money, right? And we need to buy their currency to convert it to buy the goods that we bring up to the United States. Okay, that didn't happen, right? So then the question becomes, what the hell happened to all the money, right? So Karen O says it went to traffickers. I think a lot of it got skimmed off by corruption, by corrupt politicians, by maybe the cartels. Maybe it was businesses that skimmed it off. Somebody took all that money, folks. Now, if you sit there and you think about this, what the hell happened? You have all these people working hard. They're producing all this stuff for the United States. They worked and earned $1 trillion, right? You think about this for a second. The people in Mexico earned, if you have a trade surplus, then that means your labor earned that money. Not all of it. Maybe they got 30% of it. Probably in Mexico it's less than that. They probably pay them 10 cents on the dollar. So they all yanked that money, went into Mexico. So they put in all this work, and they don't have anything to show for it. Because when they were working this whole time, the average Mexican was getting poorer. That's the reality. For 25 years straight, the average Mexican in the overall Mexican economy continued to get poorer and poorer every year. It was literally as though they could not get out of this debt trap. This is unfortunately called debt diplomacy, folks. And this is what these sons of bitches and the globalist regime are trying to do to the United States. They want to try to figure out a way to make us debt slaves to a global system. They've already run it on Mexico. I hate to say it. We, the people of the United States, maybe other nations, I don't think we should let this kind of crap happen. Okay? So, I think we should have much better policies than this. I think it's immoral what's happened to the Mexican people worldwide. I do not think that this is okay and acceptable. I'm not going to think it's okay and acceptable. I think that, frankly, we should have a Marshall Plan of some sort for Mexico that the United States helps clean this mess up, because over half of the country of Mexico is below is lower than the age of 18. So that means over the next 50 years, there could be more Mexicans in Mexico than Americans on U.S. soil, with their population being so young relative to the United States. So, anyways, I just want to point out Mexico. Obviously, the British pound lost a bunch of value too. And so I want to make sure that we kind of go through it. So then the question becomes, okay, well, how does a currency go up? Why does it go up, Bobby? That's a damn good question. Why should the value of a currency go up? We're going to go to Europe. So right after World War II. So I'm going to pull up this chart about Europe. Actually, we're going to look at Japan first. Let's look at Japan after World War II, and then we're going to look at Europe. Okay? So now I just showed you Mexico, and this was a corrupt government that ran this country into the ground and let it get fleeced. Okay? That's the reality, folks. The Mexicans, they didn't have a voice. They don't have a democracy. They didn't have good leaders. They didn't have people that were nationalistic. They just had a bunch of people that were trying to. It was a free for all. How much money can we steal? And you had a system that everybody just did that, and the people of Mexico, the whole country, is worse off as a result of this culture that was unfortunately not tied to the rule of law and like a U.S. Constitution. They didn't, even though it's a Roman Catholic country. Would think it would have a better moral compass. A lot of the people that have fleeced this country, they literally view, the people of Mexico as subhuman. I've heard that firsthand from people that are actually very wealthy Mexicans. I've heard that, like when I was in Mexico, literally, they view the Mexican population is subhuman. It's the most bizarre thing that, a Mexican person to hear a wealthy Mexican saying a poor Mexican is subhuman. And it turns my stomach that this is the world we live in at times. But if we don't get our act together in the United States and get involved and understand what the heck is going on and correct this, we're going to have a situation here on U.S. soil where we might have people that are calling other Americans subhuman, right? And this is not a good thing. This is a horrible thing. And this is why we need to go back to making sure that we go back to our Judeo-Christian roots as a nation, and we start cleaning up the dreck that takes place in government. Okay, so we're going to go to the Japanese yen now. Okay, so here's the Japanese yen. And then we'll kind of end it up with talking about the U.S. dollar and why. Because the big thing is, I want to make sure that people know why I do not believe the U.S. dollar is going to collapse. Okay, that guy just said, "Hey, we're not really tied to the rule of law right now." That's not exactly true. That guy. What you might say is there's two versions of law. There's some that the elites have a better legal system than. I hate using the word elites. I would say the scammers, the wealthiest scammers in our society do have a different set of rules right now. I'm not denying that. But what I'm saying is, we have to return to one nation under one set of rules and freedoms and justice for all. That's what we're in the middle of. Making America great is about restoring the ability for us to all be living by the same rule book. People that steal and are corrupt and kill human beings, traffic them, they need to be held to account. They shouldn't get a pass because they bribed a bunch of folks, is what I would say. What is that thing over here? Hold on a second. This is kind of weird. Okay, so let's go to the Japanese yen. So now we have the yen, which was at 357 back in 1971. And now it went to, it's at 110 right now. So 357 to 110 on the yen. Say that again. 357 to 110 on the yen. Okay. So now we're going to go to the yen. Hold on a second here. Okay. So 357, we're going to do Japanese yen. And then 357, and then the 110. Okay, so we're going to go to yen. Now, you guys, you're going to see a big difference here, okay, with this. Because the yen is the opposite. okay, of what I just told you with regards to the Mexican peso. So what happened is, as the yen was increasing its value, okay, you know, you you know you would receive 357 yen for every $1 that you gave. So it would cost you um, about a quarter of a penny to buy 1 yen. Think of it that way. 0.0028 is a quarter of a penny, approximately, because 0.0025 would be a quarter of a penny. So I want you to think, and I joke around about this, and when I was taking these classes in graduate school and college, I said, why don't the Japanese just call the yen pennies? Because that's a good way to think about it. How many pennies can you get for each US dollar? Well, if you take $1, you can get 357 pennies. Okay? And that's the deal. So you would get 357 pennies, Japanese pennies, that is. And that's why I joke around and say yen is kind of like a Japanese penny. So anyways, you can see that the yen, since this is not since 1994, this is since 1971. Okay? So the yen, it almost went to 1 yen to 1 penny, right? Almost. So the currency, minus 1, the currency went up 224%. So if you were in the United States, okay, back in 1971, and you said, you know what, let's move our family to Japan. We want to move to Japan. And you were going to buy, a house that was selling for 10 million yen. Okay, I'm going to make sure that's 10 million. Okay, so 10 million yen, and you said, okay, Bobby, I want to buy this house for 10 million yen. What would it cost in US dollars? It would cost $28,000, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 10 million. Wow. So if you wanted a house that was 100 million yen, it would cost 280 grand. Okay, that's what it would cost, folks. So $280,000. Well, now if you went to Japan, first of all, you can't buy anything in Japan I don't think for 280 grand. It's probably being unrealistic. We're going to have to add one more zero. We're going to say 1 billion yen is 2.8 million. You can get 1 billion yen if you pony up $2.8 million. Well, now if you went to Japan with $2.8 million, we're going to take this number and we're going to divide it by this number here. So back then you got 1 billion yen, and today you would get 300 million yen, 308 million yen. So you can quickly see that from your standpoint, if you were an American, you could have received 1 billion yen. Now you can only get 308. So if you take 1 billion, 308 divided by 1,000, right? Because 308 million divided by 1 billion is that number, 308. The value of the U.S. dollar relative to the Japanese yen has lost 69% of its value since 1971. That's the way to think about it. So the Mexicans lost 86% of their value versus the US dollar. We lost 69% of our buying power relative to the Japanese yen since 1971. Okay? Now you really want to mess with, if you guys really want me to mess with your head, like you guys really want me to mess with your head, now we should say, okay, Bobby, how much have the Mexicans lost relative to the Japanese? Because if the American dollar lost 69% of its value, right? I only showed you the Mexican peso since 1994. Okay, so think about it that way. Think of how much more the Mexican people are worse off than the Japanese people relative to their purchasing power since, during this time horizon. And so even if we matched it, what you would basically do is you'd say, okay, we lost 69% of our value, so that means that if the Mexicans lost 86%, we take 0.14, and then we would multiply it by 0.308, 100% minus the 69.2. So then the Mexicans lost 95.7% of their value versus the Japanese yen. So if you could put a trade on back in 1971, I guess, we don't, the Mexican peso got wiped out, folks, before, so you can't even pull it up back to 1971. It got wiped out. So all I'm saying is the average Mexican versus the average person in Japan, people in Japan are living about 20 times, they're living with about 20 times the value of the average Mexican since 1971. 20-fold. Think about that. Anyways, it's really crazy. So now we're going to go into, okay, enough of this. We we benefited over the Mexicans. The Japanese benefited over over us, and then Europe strengthened relative to us since 1945. They came back. But now keep in mind, Europe has been underwater the past decade or so, and not keeping up with the United States. So Europe has been getting strangled by regulation, and much higher tax burden. So they've literally been choking off the people in Europe with this whole process. But now I'm going to go to Excel, and we're going to show you, what happened in Japan, what happened in Mexico, what does it imply. So I'm going to go to this sheet, okay, and if the Japanese yen went up 224% per year, and this is 49 years, right? We're going to run a quick calculator and say, Bobby, why does a currency go up in value? And you say, well, it goes up because of this thing called, how productive are you? Can you get more done with less work than you could before? Simple enough. So if we said there was 49 periods, right there, that number 49, and we didn't do any payments. We're not talking about any interest here, folks. And then we started with $1. It's always a cash outflow in the beginning. But then we ended with $3.2455. Okay? That's because you always have to add what you're getting your money back, the 1 plus the 224% of growth. And then we're going to do times the end of the period. And what do you have? We show that the Japanese economy has had productivity, okay, growth of about 2.4% per year for 49 years. 2.43% per year for 49 years. And so this is what's going on, folks, that Japan, relative to the U.S., has outgrown our productivity numbers by 2.43%. So whatever our productivity growth was, they're basically saying, now keep in mind, this is in a simple model. This is only assuming that we only look at the productivity of a country. Now, why does a currency go up in value if you want it to hold value? It goes up because if you have a dollar, right? I want you to think about the PC example. If you had $1 or $1,000 and you wanted to buy a computer and you wanted a certain amount of processing power, but then a year from now, the processing power that you can buy was twice as great. So all things equal, you have more buying power than you did before. Even if you spend the same amount of money, you're getting something above and beyond what you could today. That number would be called productivity. So if you can shoot up your productivity of your dollar invested, that all of a sudden you have 50% more computing power than you did, or 100% more than you did a year ago, then the value of your money would be worth more. And in this analogy example. If we're buying food from Mexico, let's just say we're buying avocados, and all of a sudden in the United States, we are trying to figure out, okay, we want to buy these avocados from Mexico, and we're going to give them dollars. Now, if we are productive and we do things, for example, in different fields that don't require as much labor for certain physical activities, then if we can generate, let's just say, for example, in a job in California, let's just say it's paying $100,000, and before we were paying, those jobs were paying $50,000. So we're going to use an example. Somebody in California is making $50,000 a year, and they had a budget to buy $1,000 worth of avocados a year. They loved avocados. They bought $20 worth of avocados every week. Okay, I want you to imagine that. And then all of a sudden, they started making $100,000, and they didn't change their habit. They kept eating $1,000 worth of avocados a year. Now, relative to how much money they're bringing in, they went from spending 2% of their income. They spent 1,000 divided by 50. They spent 2% of their income to only 1% of their income. So now they're only spending 1% of their income on avocados. They hit it big. They're making $100,000 instead of 50, but they're not going to eat $2,000 worth of avocados. They're going to keep eating $1,000 worth of avocados in this example. And so, it's those forces that lead to productivity, that capture the productivity gains. And then as a result, if the U.S. is coming up with ways to make more money doing different things, then its ability to buy more relative to the Mexican economy continues to go up. And if the Mexicans are doing nothing but farming in this example, right, they're just making avocados, they can't keep up. So their ability to convert, they're going to have less say. Now, if the Americans are like, well, we're going to help the Mexicans, we'll instead of $1,000, we'll pay them $1,300, right? For these avocados. People don't behave that way, right? Usually people are going to want to pay the absolute minimum that they have to do this. And so this helps explain why the average American is buying 4 to 5 times as much as the average Mexican. If you went to Mexico today, folks, now keep in mind, there's also, you have to take into account, they might have repriced things. I'm glad bacon. Hey, Angela, I don't know if you know this, but avocados go great with bacon. Just saying. Especially if it's crumbled bacon, you cut open the avocado, you get the crumbled bacon in there, it's money. So anyways, I'm glad that the example makes a little more sense. But I'm just showing you one example with regards to avocados. Now, I want you to imagine this across all aspects of our economy. That we have cars, we have cement, we have different types of corn, and all these other things where if we can produce more with less money, i.e. less capital, we don't have to put up as much money to produce more. What is that? That's called knowledge. It's called IP, intellectual property. We've come up with a way to do something that other people don't know how to do. I'll give you an example. I know how to look through very large amounts of data at probably a lot less time than you do. That's just the reality. I've learned how to do it. So if I can go through 1,000 pages of material and in 1/5 the amount of time as you, if we both have the same ability to comprehend what we're going through, and we both can reasonably come to the same conclusions on the information, but if I can move 5 times as fast as you to go through that information, if I was a currency, my currency would go up in value, and yours would go down in this example. And I want you to think about all these different little supply and demand curves across our economy, where different skill sets and different things that people are making are fluctuating. So where am I going with all this? Well, when people say that the U.S. dollar is going to collapse, okay, obviously, if we take on more debt than the country is worth, that could be a problem. But we have a positive net worth. So it would be like saying, hey, Bobby, I'm going to use the mortgage example. So let's say your house was worth $300,000 and you took on, you used to have, $10,000 worth of debt. And you had $10,000 worth of debt on the house. So it's 3% of the house value, right? 10 divided by 300. So now if somebody said, if you take on another penny of debt, Bobby, this house you're going to go insolvent. The value of your house is going to crash. And you'd be like, nonsense. So now all of a sudden the 10,000 goes to 50,000. So now we have $50,000 of debt. The house is worth 300, but we might have pushed it up a little. Now it's worth 320 or something, 310. And then somebody came out and started screaming at you saying, that guy, Bobby, he's going to collapse. He took on 50,000. He has 5 times as much debt as he had, and his house is worth 310. They're screaming Chicken Little. And the value of everything he has is going to collapse. And then you say, whatever. The value of the house is still 310. I paid 50, but I'm making more money. I can afford the debt. Okay? And so this whole argument that, the debt is going to somehow collapse things, people always seem to leave out the part about the assets. You have to look at the assets, and you got to look at, okay, well, how many assets are there with the debt? And what is the earnings power of the asset? So if the amount of money that can be generated on the asset is greater than, the carry, how much it costs to pay the interest and then pay down the debt, you can't go insolvent, right? I mean, that's the whole point. Now you can possibly file for bankruptcy if you run into a liquidity problem. That's a different conversation. If the banks stop lending and you have all your money tied up in stuff that's not trading, and all of a sudden you can't get any money out of the bank, right? That's liquidity. That means that you don't have enough money to pay people back the contracts for what you agreed to. Now that could be a real problem. That almost happened in 2008. That's why the Federal Reserve stepped in and backstopped the money market funds. It almost happened again last year when credit seized up, the economy stopped working. There's a lot of debt that needed to be paid to keep the economy from collapsing. Folks, last February, March, right? They tried to collapse the entire U.S. economy. When I say they, some scumbags, criminals, tried to collapse our country. President Trump took decisive action, and he prevented that. That's the reality. I know people don't like to think about it. I know some people, on the left don't want to acknowledge this fact. But the reality is President Trump prevented the collapse of the entire U.S. economy last year with the help of some of the right people within our government. I don't think he made the decision on his own. I think there were some good people that did advise him and prevented the outright collapse of our economy. You don't believe me? Go look at what happened in the middle of the month. I think of February or March when stocks were down 40, 50%. That was a massive liquidity shock. And, we didn't collapse. We didn't turn into Venezuela, but there sure as hell was a lot of effort to create a situation where the United States was going to be like Venezuela. And I talked about Venezuela yesterday, my Bible study class, because it's like, 30 million people have lost about 40 pounds, 30 to 40 pounds in the past 18 months. They literally have been starving to death. And before the financial crisis hit and before, the United States, we are in a situation where we didn't do what we did before, which is lead an effort to prevent such chaos and madness. And I think that was a very bad thing for us as a nation because, we kind of showed the world that, hey, you guys are doing great. we have a great situation, a great system, rule of law. But since we became a little lopsided, there's too much power concentrated into some bad hands. We kind of started to lose some of our moral authority and do some of the things that we used to do to show the world that we deserve to be in this position. And I do believe that the United States does deserve to be in this position, and it's the greatest nation in the history of the world for the simple fact that every nation on this earth wants to have people live here. Everybody wants to come here and live in the United States, and it's not by accident, folks. It's because our productivity is higher, our dollar, our currency is strong, and we're about 60% of the world's currencies are in here. I want to show you guys something. And then we're going to kind of wrap it up. I'll answer a couple of questions. But one of the things I want to show you is, hold on a second here, is right here. Here's some foreign currencies, okay? Now, a lot of people like to say, well, look, the Chinese have a lot of U.S. dollars in their reserves. This is not a sign of strength, folks. This is a sign of a lot of people like to say it's a sign of strength. I don't think it's as much of a sign of strength as it's as a sign of necessity. They need those foreign reserves because they need to be able to buy things from around the world. And nobody wants their stinking currency. That's what that means. When it's $3.37 trillion in U.S. dollars, this country's worth $120 trillion. So, they need that money because other countries that they buy oil from, buy raw materials from, they want to get paid in U.S. dollars. And since China is a very big buyer in the world market, it needs a lot of money to keep its economy going. And think of that money as kind of carrying the float. The other thing I would point out is with regards to these numbers on reserves, the people of, the people of China, they don't have free ability to leave with their money. And so that's the other thing that we don't fully see. And frankly, I think the Chinese are lying about how much they have. I'm not sure if anybody checks it, but how much of this is in our vaults or what they're saying. But I don't trust any of the numbers coming out of China. They basically, try to show us what their numbers are within the same day of closing a quarter. It's just nonsense. I just don't believe it. Anyways, but that's one of the other reasons why I would say if the U.S. dollar was truly on a way of collapse, even if China dumped all their U.S. dollars, they would have to convince other countries to use their worthless renminbi. And I joke around, I say, remember the renminbi, because I do think that it is going to be worthless at some point. I think that you want to bank on something happening before the U.S. dollar. I'll bet on the renminbi getting wiped out before the U.S. dollar ever gets wiped out. So anyways, someone said, Bobby, though, if the U.S. debt is larger than the assets, then wouldn't the U.S. be insolvent? Yes, that would be the case, Dave, but we don't have more debts than the value of our assets. So we're not insolvent. So that's not the case. That's what people kind of say, Bobby, the GDP of this country is 20 trillion, and we have 30 trillion of national debt. We're insolvent. And it's like, no, we're not, because the country's worth 120 trillion. So if our national debt is 30 trillion, that net worth number, that 120, that takes off the 30 trillion, folks, just so that we're clear. Joe pulled the plug on oil. Why no one pulling the plug on the swamp? Lead me to it. I don't know what you're saying with the oil. So anyways, I hope this was helpful. I know it was a little longer than I thought, but remember what drives the value of a currency up over time. You get more productive. So if you know how to program versus someone who doesn't, right by default, you'll be more productive than someone who doesn't. And so the United States, I can't stress it enough. If we want to get wealthier over time and more productive, we need more people going into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, because that's the true way to build wealth. And that's what we should be doing in the inner cities across this country. QFS, Remedy is this issue. It's gold back once the central. Yeah, I don't know enough about QFS. I know a little bit, Deanna. I'll look into it some more, but I don't know enough that makes me comfortable to start talking about it. Um, you know, uh, uh, the way I understand currencies. Like if I understood QFS backward and forward, I would gladly talk about it. I have not gone through the material well enough that I would be willing to just shoot from the hip with it. And first of all, everything I said, I understand what I'm talking about. So it may not, I could probably go on for hours talking about everything I said because I enjoy learning things on a very granular level, and it's a lot of fun for me, and I can just kind of keep peeling the onion back. But I do not have that knowledge as of yet for QFS. Perhaps I will learn it at some point. And if I do, maybe I'll figure out how to make a bunch of money off of it. Maybe you, because I have had other people tell me that I should definitely learn about it, and so maybe I need to take the time to pick up more information about that. So, with that said, folks, I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon, and I will talk to you soon. God bless.